DirectFlow and NFS Exports. Just with any remote, as with any remote file system, NFS must be exported for clients to be able to access it. When a DirectFlow client attempts to mount, Realm President checks the DirectFlow exports to see which volumes, if any, the direct client is allowed to mount. The president also checks to see if the client is root squashed for the mount, and if the mount is read-write or read-only. We'll talk about root squashing in just a minute. When an NFS client attempts to mount, the gateway director is the one that checks the NFS exports to see which volumes, if any, the client is allowed to mount and with which parameters. DirectFlow and NFS exports are stored in different places. For years, basically in NFS 1.2.3.4 and 5.0, the export rules in Etsy exports govern both DirectFlow and NFS mounts, and the DirectFlow export lines were not allowed to specify rules by volume. The method of implementing NFS style per volume exports is not compatible with export architecture, and to resolve this and allow volume-based export rules, DirectFlow exports are stored in the Realm database. Okay. I'm going to talk about NFS exports first. Although the NFS export rules are contained in Etsy exports, this file should not be edited directly. This is one of the things where if you edit it directly, the Realm will override it. Realm provides a procedure for NFS exports to be saved Realm-wide, so every director has the current exports. If your proposed export changes would be simple, you can just edit the exports here. Storage, NFS. We looked at enabling NFS, and the last thing, NFS exports, and this is the default NFS exports. You can edit it right in that window. This exports all volumes to all NF clients with no root squashing. The alders is a particular NFS exports rules. Root, alders, map root equals 0,0. We'll talk about that in a minute. The export syntax follows the FreeBSD NFS export syntax. Why? Because the directors run the FreeBSD kernel. FreeBSD syntax is probably the same as Linux exports, but if there's any difference, again, we're following FreeBSD. So if you're simple, just edit them right there, commit changes. If they're not simple or you want a record, you're going to download the exports file, you're going to put it somewhere, you're going to edit it, you can upload the file and commit it. That way you can make your, you can version your exports file, whatever you want. Let's look at this. Exporting root with alders exports all NFS volumes via NFS. No read-write or read option is specified, so it is by default read-write. No clients or networks are specified, so NFS is exported to the whole world if they can attempt to mount. Export lines that specify network, list of IP address, list of client names, or a net group limit access volumes that specify exports those clients. If you use names, then you need a name resolution server, which we're going to talk about in the next today later. Okay. So net groups. Net group option is used. It must be defined on the Realm. This is very little used, but you can do it. We're going to do net groups. We're going to specify the IP addresses that belong to that net group. You can also configure the Realm to use an NFS LDAP server to resolve the net group into IP addresses. must be defined. You can either use NFS or LDAP to resolve the net group, and we also provide a way for you to specify it locally. Changes to the net group do not, the directors do not reread the net group very often. So if you change the net group, you must restart Mount D, so they will reread the net group. And this is the command to restart Mount D. This is not disruptive. It does not affect existing mounts. It just affects clients that are attempting to mount right that second. Mount D restarts pretty fast. Root squashing. Map root 0 equals 0 means that users logged into an NFS client as root also have root privileges in the mount volumes. These clients are not root squashed. Any of the following mount options do root squash the users. Map root equals user with a user list of users or group specified. That means that the root user on the NFS client gets the privileges on the remote file system of a particular user. More often, map root is nobody equals nobody, that maps the users to the privileges held by nobody or the world. And any exports that do not contain a map root option also root squashes the users of that mount by that export line. They do not have root privileges on the realm. They do on their particular client. Gateway directors use the Mount D service to check NFS exports when the NFS client mounts. If you change export, that only affects new mounts. It does not affect any clients that are already mounted. All right. That's NFS exports. Changes, questions so far on that? Okay. DirectFlow exports stored in a different place, totally different syntax. Again, if we have it simple, we're going to go to storage, DirectFlow, and here is our default content. Again, you can download this, change it, upload it, just like you could have with NFS. Here's our download exports files. Go edit and then upload. Typically, when you download these export files, you are downloading to a volume in NFS, not to your local machine. Let's look at these lines. DirectFlow's rules are evaluated in order from the top down. This is very important. The first rule that matches a client for a volume applies. Anything else is ignored. If one rule for volume specifies the client IP address and another rule for the volume specifies the client's network, whichever rule occurs first in DirectFlow export applies. It doesn't matter one is more specific or the other. This is important. No further rules for that client for that volume are evaluated. So if you specify anything about a client or something, the client is not included in any globs. If there is a rule for a specific volume that includes a client, the volume will not be evaluated in any rule that uses star is the volume specification. We're going to see an example of that. The default DirectFlow export, all DirectFlow clients read and access to all volumes, no root squashing. Okay. Now we're going to go over the syntax a little bit. The syntax does not follow NFS exports syntax. Volume, this is always volume. That tells them that the next thing is a volume. You can either say the exact volume name in quotes or star. You've got two choices. The next line is the network or the IP or star. No choices. You do not, you cannot specify ranges or names or net groups. So a subnet, an individual IP or star are the only thing allowed for this next option. Next is read write, read only, or deny. Deny is very tricky, just as it is in a lot of places. Read write is the default. And then any map root option. And again, this is written so even if read write is the default, I would put it down there. So, unlike NFS, root is not just a path, it is a volume. To access any volume, a DirectFlow client must be allowed to read the root volume. So if they're not allowed to read root, they don't get any kind of access anywhere. Access to projects does not give the client access to root. Okay. The file managers on the service that the volume owner on the volume owner director tracks DirectFlow exports when a DirectFlow client requests an object callback, not just on mount. So if the client's IP is not allowed to access the object by DirectFlow export rules, the file manager returns a permission denied error to the DirectFlow client. Because of this, when DirectFlow exports are changed, the file manager on all volume owner directors will call all client callbacks, not just on the volumes where it's changed, on every callback in the realm. This is technically a volume state change. The volumes are still online. You don't see it, but the volumes are changed to online DirectFlow exports change. Small pause while the DirectFlow, if you change exports while the DirectFlow client requests new callbacks from the file manager. The write caps are not recalled, just the callbacks, so that the file manager can evaluate the callback with respect to the new DirectFlow exports. Therefore, changes to DirectFlow exports go into effect immediately. We have seen hangs when DirectFlow exports have changed. Due to this, some of that is that when you're excluding DirectFlow clients that are currently reading and writing, some of that may be some other thing that is under investigation, but just understand that you might want to choose a more quiet time to change DirectFlow exports, unless you have a strong reason to change them right now. Again, this is what I just said. The PAN manager service may hang if the new export rules do not allow a DirectFlow client to write data is in the process of writing. This can cause a race condition. To prevent this, notify the users who client will now be excluded from writing to volumes before executing the exports changed. If volume access to by all clients hangs after a DirectFlow exports changed, contact us. We may see in your logs that the file manager has stuck request of the particular type that it's trying to change the exports. At the same time, it's trying to deal with client callbacks. And we may advise you to core the PAN manager service. This is a clean restart, and it frees all these stuck requests and restarts affected volumes. We don't see this very often, but note that if all of a sudden nothing is happening, we may have stuck requests, and we may need to do something to PAN manager. DirectFlow export rules do not apply to any IP addresses in the realm's IP range. We do not want to root squash our directors. The directors mostly use RPCs to access PNFS data. Nevertheless, they use their built-in DirectFlow client to access volume data. They must be able to read and write to the user-quoted databases. And they also use utilities to modify PNFS data that use the DirectFlow client. This means that Panasas directors are not denied access to volumes in the realm and are not root squashed regardless of what the DirectFlow exports are. The Panasas directors also use this built-in DirectFlow client to fulfill NFS and CIFS gateways when they're acting as a gateway. But the access controls for NF and CIFS are implemented through the NFS exports for NFS and CIFS shares for CIFS, not by limiting the gateway client running on directors. We have a bug in some older releases where if you have two IP ranges, we only didn't root squash directors in the first range. That has been fixed for some time. Example. Okay, here is an example. We support the hash comments, which are nice. I commented out the original line. These clients are trusted. Volume star. We're going to give our trusted clients full access. Well, let's drop down here. These are our login nodes. This is a fictional IP address, and we only want these clients to be able to access projects for some reason. So we're going to give them read-write access to projects, and they are root squashed. Why are they root squashed? Because there are no map root. We do not want to give them root access to this. They must go in as individual users, even if they manage to log into their client as root. Okay, so we do not want to give them read-write access to root simply because read-only. So now let's go back up here. Because we limited this network to read-only, we need to give this network read-write. We're going to give this network access to all volumes, read-write, not root squashed. But we have to have a separate line for projects because we're called out projects here. Projects and IP address. Therefore, this network does not have access to projects with the glob. So we have to call it out right there. Guidelines. The goal of both DirectFlow and NFS Exports is to limit mount rights to groups of hosts with certain IP addresses. User limitations must be done by traditional POSIX or Windows permissions. Some groups of clients may have to have their mount privileges limited by some combination of the following: limiting the volumes they can mount, limiting the mounts to read-only, or root squashing. That's for you to decide. To improve security, limit the exports to the networks that should be accessing the realm. You don't particularly want to export it to DirectFlow to the whole world, although that's the usual case. Know that it may be difficult to predict how export rules are enforced. Be sure to test the new rules. If clients have mount problems after an export change or permission problems immediately after that, the export should be the primary suspect. Review. Should the Etsy export file be directly edited on a Panasas director?
No.
No. Do the export rules found in Etsy export apply to DirectFlow clients?
No.
They do not. Good. When are NFS export rules applied to NFS clients? Is it A, only when they mount, B, only when they access an object for which they do not have permissions cached, Or C, immediately at the time the export rules are changed?
A.
A, very good. When are DirectFlow exports apply to DirectFlow clients? A, only when they mount. B, only when they access an object for which they do not have permissions cached. Or C, immediately at the time the export rules are changed.
C.
It's C. If I'd put this at they have an existing callback, we would know that the callbacks have been recalled. So it is indeed C. Given these three successive lines in DirectFlow exports, will client .23 be able to write two volume projects?
Yes.
Why?
The third line is the only one that pertains to the client and has
Right.
/projects in
Okay.
it.
Does it though? Look up here. Volume projects.
Oh, because it's already called out, it won't
That's
do
right.
it even with a star.
That's right.
Well,
This
then
is kind of
never
an
mind.
oddity, and I'm not quite sure why the architecture was designed that way, but I know it is in fact. To give client 2.3 access to projects. I mean, these are specific IPs, but if projects has a line with anything but star, then it doesn't apply here. So we have to make another line with projects. This is a little bit different, but I mean, we want to call out this principle. Let's say that you did this and you thought that it would be fine. All of a sudden, .23 cannot access projects. What should you do?
Put in a line for projects for that IP
Yes,
address.
that could be, but let's say you couldn't figure it out. Yes, you said, oh, shoot, now I remember that I needed a line for projects. You would certainly do that. But let's say you didn't know. You would revert your change immediately and then open a service request and say, what did I do? But the main thing is you would know that almost certainly the problem was with an exports. You would look and see if you could correct it. If you didn't, you would revert, talk to us. What should you troubleshoot if an NFS or DirectFlow client gets a permission denied error on mount?
The exports file?
Exports. This is one of two things. It's either that the client does not have permission to the mount point locally, which is very rare. I've actually seen that happen, but it's almost always exports. And the client traces will actually say that, but you can just take it to the bank, it's exports. What should you do if clients unexpectedly cannot access volumes after either NFS or DirectFlow app exports has been changed?
Revert your changes.
That's right. Revert the changes or fix them. If you look at them and see if you see an obvious error, If not, revert the changes and then you can work on figure it out later. Questions on this?